Erev Tov, good evening, everyone. This evening, which is Wednesday, and the Parsha for this week is Parshat Ki Teitzei. It's part of a series of Parshiot. As you know, and we've discussed, Moshe Rabbeinu is about, along with the Jewish people, to enter Eretz Yisrael. And he is not, of course, going to enter, but the people are. Moshe Rabbeinu has been the leader of the Jewish people at the very beginning, a very reluctant leader. But as time went on, Moshe Rabbeinu became so devoted to the Jewish people that his being and the being of the Jewish people is merged into one. And of course, until this very day, Moshe Rabbeinu is the most dominant, probably the most beloved personality in Jewish history. So now it is the beginning, 1 month prior to the entrance of the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu provides for them his farewell address. The farewell address itself, the address itself can be divided actually into two primary themes. One is to remind them of where the Jewish people has erred along the way, and of course you didn't have to look hard to see that throughout, from almost from the day of Yetziat Mitzrayim, whether it was at the Yam Suf or during the weeks that followed. The complaining that went by, the attack of Amalek, which, by the way, is reviewed in this week's Parsha. Moshe Rabbeinu, in his talking to the Jewish people, speaks to them about Amalek and the necessity for us to destroy Amalek, not only the physical Amalek that exists outside of us, but the Amalek which exists inside of us as well. Because there's in every person, certainly in every Jew, there is an Avram Avinu within us, and there's also, to some degree, an Amalek. Every time we speak Lashon Hara, to which we gain nothing from other than the satisfaction of putting someone else down, that is a form of Amalek. So, but nevertheless, we're not going to enter into that discussion this evening. But we are going to begin our understanding of Parshat Ki Teitzei. Now, the Rambam includes in the Parsha of Ki Teitzei 72 mitzvot, which constitutes well more than 10% of all of the mitzvot in the Torah. And in Bereshit, of course, there are only 3 mitzvot that we have. The 3 mitzvot are Pura Ravu, the mitzvah to have children, to populate the world, the mitzvah of Gid Hanasheh, the mitzvah for Jews particularly. We have the mitzvah not to eat the sciatic nerve of mammals, the animals that we're eating. And then, of course, there's the mitzvah of Brit Milah. And after that, we have well over 500 mitzvot up until here, that are given. Now, as I mentioned last week, but it bears mentioning again, that the parsha or the sefer of Devarim is called by the Rambam Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah means the second law, Deuteronomos. Deutero is second nomos law, and in it, of course, we have many mitzvot that are introduced in earlier Sfarim, and they are elaborated on or repeated here in Sefer Devarim. Moshe Rabbeinu urges the Jews to follow the mitzvot that they have, and of course there will be new mitzvot that are also introduced here in our parsha. The new mitzvot are mitzvot that very, very much have to do with living in Eretz Yisrael, agricultural mitzvot in particular, also business mitzvot, because the Jews, once they enter Eretz Yisrael, are no longer going to live a supernatural life. They're going to live a life very similar to all of us who preceded them, follow them. Of course, technology may change, populations may change, but the distribution of people in within Eretz Israel may change, but we are now living in an age of natural, that which is natural. So while we talk about nature, then this week's parsha, the 72 mitzvahs which we have, we're going to examine more than one tonight, but I want to talk a little bit about nature, and we will talk for a moment or two about Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton. Now, Newton was, up until Einstein, was considered to be the greatest physicist in history. That, in fact, he was a brilliant man. He also believed in the Rabbanu Shalom too. He believed in God. A religious man too. And we're going to talk about tonight what we call Newton's first law of movement.
I can't tell you how
Does someone want to speak with me? I noticed there's a little background. It could be that we need to mute. But okay, there we go. Okay. The first law is Newton's first law.
That's true.
Probably need to mute everyone here. One second.
Julie Enders.
What?
And I was totally wishing this here.
Excuse me. There is background talk which is going on. Normally, I don't mind it, except I think now we should be okay. We need to make sure that we're muted. By the way, at any point, if someone wants to ask a question, please let me know. Absolutely. So we're going to start with Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. He formulated several laws of movement. The first law is what we're going to talk about this evening for a moment or two, and hopefully you will see how it's connected to our parsha. Newton's first law is an object at rest remains at rest unless acted upon by another force. And that the corollary to that is that an object in motion continues in motion at a constant direct pace until such time as it is acted upon by an outside force. Most of us were forced to learn that important postulate by Newton, and that is basically once you get started doing, once an object gets moving, unless something else will interrupt it, it will continue in that same direction. And we're going to see today that this parsha deals in the spiritual world with a certain sense of Newtonian physics. We're going to begin by looking at Perek Daled of Pirkei Avot, Mishnah Bet, Ben Azai Omer. Now, Ben Azai, there's a lot of speculation as to why he is called Ben Azai. His first name was Shimon, but largely it was to help distinguish between other Shimons. Okay, but Ben Azai says the following: you should run to do a relatively simple mitzvah as a complicated mitzvah. It could be also a mitzvah which does not appear to have as much spiritual weight to it, does not appear to have as much spiritual weight to it. All mitzvot were given by the same commander. And so there's no difference between do not wear shatnez and when your mother says make your bed. Kiborein. So every one of these is the same commander. Because it's the same commander, they are to be treated with equal seriousness. So he then says that you should run toward doing a mitzvah and run away from an avera. And then Ben Azai says, "Shemitzvah goreret mitzvah," that a mitzvah, one mitzvah leads to the next mitzvah. Va'avera goreret avera, and each avera or misdeed that we do leads us to do another one. And also sheschar mitzvah mitzvah. There's a number of different views about this last phrase, which we're not going to go into now. Mitzvah, schar mitzvah mitzvah. The simplest view is that the reward of a mitzvah is you get to do another mitzvah. And uschar avera avera, and the reward, sadly, the punishment or the consequence of an avera is you're going to do another avera. Okay. Now there are other interpretations, but this will do for our purposes. Can you hear the echo of Newtonian physics in that? An object in motion continues in motion until such time as acted upon by an outside force. And so it is. Once we begin doing a mitzvah, that leads to the next mitzvah, and to the next mitzvah, and to the next mitzvah. And it's almost as if we pick up a certain spiritual momentum from actually doing just one mitzvah, from doing just one mitzvah. I remember when I was a young boy, none of us did mitzvot, or at least not consciously, in Canton, Ohio, where we grew up, my friends and I. But I was influenced by several remarkable people, and I started doing mitzvot. I maybe wore a kippah, maybe made a bracha, and each one of the things that I did led me on to the next and to the next until I would go to yeshiva, etc. And I then was set in motion spiritually. And unfortunately, many of my friends were not set in motion spiritually. And it's as if we were going in we're all moving, but we're moving in completely different directions. So this is the primary focus today. How do we see that in this week's parsha? Very nice. You found it in Pirkei Avos. Most people, if not everybody who's listening, has heard that famous Mishnah, Perek Daled, Mishnah Bet, the fourth parak of Pirkei Avos, the second Mishnah. But we're going to see that Chazal reinforce this idea of spiritual motion, and it's found in a very prominent way in our parsha today. It begins, of course, Parshat Ki Teitzei begins with the mitzvah of, if indeed Jews embark upon a milchemet reshut, not a milchemet mitzvah. And they take a captive woman who may be attractive to them. So as you know, the Torah talks about the human personality and the human weaknesses, that we are to do everything we can to dissuade ourselves, or dissuade the person who has her under his authority from abusing this person. So she has to be able to mourn her mother and her father. She has to dress in an unattractive way. She has to allow her nails to grow and her hair to grow. All of these things in order to have her be unattractive to him, and in doing so, if a person does eventually fulfill all of those things, and I think I may have inadvertently said her hair should grow. I meant her hair has to be shaven. So, but as we do all of these things, she has to she will become less attractive. And then ideally, if afterwards he wants to marry her, he may do so. That's the mitzvah. So let's see what Rashi says here about the two mitzvot, which are actually posed together. The first, actually several mitzvot. The first mitzvah is this one of Eshet Yefat Toar, the captive woman. The second mitzvah then is if a person has two wives, the Torah permitted then for people to have two wives, one beloved, one not. Once again, we see attraction or revulsion, one or the other, and the firstborn is born to the one that the man is less inclined to, and then so he is not allowed that bechor when the other children are taken or come into the world, he is not allowed to. He is not allowed to, the husband is not allowed to give preference to the bechor, to the child of the beloved wife over the child of the wife that he does not care about so much. Again, that's a whole different story, though, the issue of polygamy. But nevertheless, the Torah tells us the bechor is the bechor, and therefore you have to give him what is coming to him. You cannot violate the structural law. And then, of course, after that, the next mitzvah is again, they seem to be disparate. A ben sorer umoveh, a son who is the rebellious or the wayward son who doesn't listen to his parents. Again, Chazal tell us that ben sorer umoveh is one of the three mitzvot that lo haya v'lo nivra, that never really occurred. The Torah is talking in theory. The theory itself, of course, is that that parents have to be the authorities in the home, and when that doesn't happen, and when a child is recalcitrant, so then, in theory, what should happen to him is that he should be killed while he's young. And Rashi tells us, Ben Sora Umore, Nerag al Shem Sofa, says Rashi, he's killed. The Torah tells us that this Ben Sora Umore is to be killed al Shem Sofa, because what he's going to end up being. Higia Torah the Sof Dato, the Torah goes down. Actually, the Torah goes to see the ultimate end of a child who just never listens. And again, we're not talking about children that we have difficulty with. We all know that the Chachamim, and both in our days and in previous days, are going to great lengths to make sure that children who are what we would call wayward or rebellious are not only are they not killed, they're beloved. They're to be, as much as possible, they are to be maintained within the family structure. But the Torah said, but it says here that Sof in the end, Shemachala Mamonoviv. In the end, if he shows such complete disregard for his father's material wealth, or his parents even, and that he eats what he wants, when he wants, and to the degree that he wants, in the end, the Torah says, with such a child, this could only grow. The child is setting himself in spiritual motion. Umavakesh limudo ve'enu motzei. And so we see that he when he wants something, he can no longer find it, and therefore he will end up being a thief. But when he runs out of the material of his father's house, so then he will then go to steal, and when he goes to steal, he can ultimately kill someone else in the process. And so therefore, the Torah tells us sheyamus mutav sheyamus zakai yamus chayiv. Even though what he has done now is not as egregious, but nevertheless, in the end, in this theoretical situation, he should die blameless or without major sin, rather than to die a criminal. So once again, we see the Torah portrays for us that within the structure of or within the concept of a ben sora or umure, so that once he gets started and he is not disciplined properly, and by the way, Chazal tell us that, and the Gemara says to us that even in theory, he is not put to death. Why? Because he has to listen to Einenu Shomea Bikoleinu. He doesn't listen to our voice. And Chazal tell us it means parents have to speak with one voice. The child should not get mixed messages. And so there are so many limitations upon this, which again, Chazal say, anyway, never occurred, that the lessons here are theoretical, which then can lead to the actual lessons about how we treat children, how we raise children, how we are to be patient with them. Okay, and so this that's the Ben Soromot. The next mitzvah is if a person is a Ben Soromot and ultimately does end up killing someone else, the Torah tells us that when he is executed, his human dignity should not be taken away, because as the Torah says that kilolat Elokim talui, to hold him up, to be killed, and then to be left there as a mark of derision is something that we may not do. But now, in the meantime, though, what do is we see Chazal tell us that if a person takes an Eshet Tiflat Toar, doesn't listen, doesn't follow the rules and the protocol regarding a woman taken in war, and he marries her, sleeps with her, God forbid, violates her. So then what the Torah says next is, if you want to know what will come from that, it'll come to ultimately a person will have two children, and one is one from a wife that he loves, and one from a wife that he doesn't love. Again, an extension of this first law, and the Torah tells us you're not allowed to give preference to the child who is not a bechor. And then the Torah tells us about ben Sora Umora. What does it mean that he goes that such a child then oftentimes will go off, as we say, off the derech, and he will become a rebellious child, taking what he wants, when he wants, with no respect for his parents. And then ultimately, because he has set himself up with this idea, this lifestyle, so what happens when he runs out of food, and he runs out of money, and he runs out of the material that a parent can provide, then what does he do? He becomes a highwayman, and he will take when he can't get at home, he will take from others. And then, of course, that will lead to his own death and execution. So the Torah tells us again about setting ourselves into spiritual motion, but in a negative sense. It works both ways. As Ben Azai says, Avera gorer at Avera. All right, and Avera, actually, one Avera leads to the next, which leads to the next, and oftentimes exponentially growing as time goes on. But the good news is that it works the other way as well. Chazal tell us that the Torah a little later on in this parsha, in Perak Chavbet, Perak Chavbet Pasuk Vav, the Torah tells us about the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan. Again, each of these mitzvot, you can write them, not a Masechta, but you certainly can write a lot about them in halacha. The exact whether it's an obligation to send the bird away, or whether you only send the bird away if you want the eggs, that's a different issue, and certainly one which has to be dealt with. But we're not going to do it here. But the Torah tells us what you must do is to send the bird away. And again, the Gemara talks about whether that's an act of mercy on the part of God, and that's why He gave us that mitzvah. The Gemara certainly, especially when it comes to a shliach tzibur, tells us that can't be done. But the idea is to follow that mitzvah. And then the Torah says, when you build a house, so you must put on the roof, on a flat roof, you're obligated to put a banister to prevent people from falling. And then when you do that, the Torah then puts right after that another seemingly or disconnected mitzvah. Lo tizrak kar b'cha kilayim. So then we have laws of agriculture particularly as regards farming, right? And then the Torah tells us about making sure that we observe the laws, all the laws regarding bikurim and the laws regarding the taking of the harvesting of such fruits. And then the Torah tells us right after that, again, seemingly disconnected, that we're not allowed to plow with a shore and a chamor together. All right. Now again, the rationale behind it. Perhaps we could at another time we could talk about it in what the Sefer HaChinuch says and others. Largely, it's tied to a certain sense of rachmanis on the animal, which is smaller and weaker, being pulled by the stronger animal. But the Torah tells us here not to do this. So it seems like a jumble of mitzvot. Then it says lo til bas shatnez. You're not allowed to tzemer fishtim yachdav. The Torah tells us that you are not supposed to wear shatnez, which we heard about earlier in Sefer Vayikra. And then now the Torah tells us the mitzvah of tzitzis, which we hear in Sefer Devarim, Bamidbar, and Parshat Shalach, that we have a mitzvah of tzitzis. They seem to be disparate halachot. They seem not to be connected at all to each other. But says Rashi, he brings as follows. He says, Ki tivne bayit chadash. This is pasuk chet, per chavbet pasuk bet, pasuk chet. In kiyamta mitzvah shliach hakan, shaluach hakan, if you fulfill the mitzvah of sending the bird out, sofcha livnot bayit chadash, you'll be rewarded. You'll be building a new house. Umakayim mitzvah t'makeh, and with that you get to do another mitzvah, the mitzvah of building a banister, ostensibly, but not completely, to save other individuals, not to fall off the roof. Mitzvah goreret mitzvah. Rashi says it explicitly. Mitzvah goreret mitzvah. And then once that happens, now you've got your house. You fulfilled the mitzvah of makeh, and then the tagia, the kerem, the sadeh, the gadim naim. And if you do all that, you will have Hashem will bless you with a vineyard and a field, and from that field you can make clothing, beautiful clothing, and therefore Rashi says, Lakach nismechu parshiot halon. That's why all of these mitzvot that seem to be mitzvot that are disjointed, they don't seem to have a connection, but they all do have a connection. And that is, says Rashi, says Medrash, that once a person sets herself or himself into spiritual motion by doing a mitzvah, you move just as literally as in the dynamics of physics. You set yourself on a path, and as long as you continue on that path, you are then rewarded with the next mitzvah. Ki schar mitzvah, as the Medrash says. The reward of a mitzvah is you get to do another one. And now that you rejoice at doing another one. Mitzvah we can sometimes see as burdens, or at best obligations. So oftentimes it happens, we see a mitzvah, the burden, getting up in the morning early, and having to daven early. But then after a while, we begin to realize it's an obligation, not a burden. We all have obligations. The fact that I need to drive my child to school or check her homework doesn't mean that it's a burden, but it is an obligation. Finally, though, the highest level is to see mitzvot as opportunities. Mitzvot, every mitzvah we do is an opportunity not only to fulfill Hashem's word on that mitzvah, but on future mitzvot as well. So this probably is the most important element of today's shir. One thing I want to add: the Gemara tells us that if a person above litame, if a person puts himself on the road for tuma of inappropriate behavior, becoming tameh himself, so the Gemara says potchimo. The opportunity is there. That it's not. It is not that that God stops us, but potchimo. We have an opportunity to do that aveira or choice. As by the way, as Rabbeinu Yonah says, Hashem Yisborach doesn't make us do anything, but He does. He gives us choices. It's up to us to make the right choice. But then, habal taher, if a person is actively seeking to make himself not tameh, but to make himself or herself tahor. Tahor here is, of course, in a metaphoric sense, to live a life of purity. Then the Gemara says Messiah law. It's not just opening the door. HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually assists us in various different ways to become tahor. So let's hope, as we now, of course, are in Elul, and we now are in the season of choices, and we are in the season of setting ourselves, hopefully, into spiritual dynamic motion. Let us hope and pray that we'll be able to fulfill the mitzvah of performing mitzvot that lead to ultimate mitzvot, and then lead Mitzvah to, hopefully, if enough of us do it, they come make a Mashiach. So I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week in the Hashem.
Thank you. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom vorach.
Canton, Ohio. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio.
You did? Who did?
Weisenberg.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, then we got what to talk about.
Yes, yes.
Very good.
Youngstown
Wonderful.
from the age of 5 to the age of 18.
One.